A physicist reveals the secrets of human endurance. A new book explains how our brains can hold our performance back, and how to get around it. Watch the end of a long race, and you'll notice a strange pattern: the athletes speed up. This happens to 5K runners, cross-country skiers, and ultramarathoners, who all suddenly find enough gas in the tank to sprint in the home stretch. What was holding them back the rest of the race? Alex Hutchinson, a physicist, author, and distance runner who represented Canada in international competitions, has thought deeply about questions like this. And he explores them in a fascinating new book, Endure: Mind, Body, and the Curiously Elastic Limits of Human Performance. One of Hutchinson's obsessions is what our minds do under the stresses of performance and how we can trick them to shave seconds off times. I spoke with Hutchinson about our current understanding of mind over muscle, brain-boosting tactics, why you shouldn't do your taxes before a marathon, and his favorite sport to watch at the Winter Olympics. A lightly edited transcript of our conversation follows. A marathon. Can you explain the conventional wisdom around endurance and how your thinking on it shifted while writing the book? Alex Hutchinson. The default assumption is that limits are about the body, and the body is a machine. And so if you understand the components of the machine and how it works, you should understand your limits. In terms of endurance, we think of things like VO2 max, the maximum amount of oxygen a body can use during intense exercise. It governs how quickly you can deliver oxygen to your muscles. More than a decade ago, I came across some research that people were rethinking this idea, and finding that, actually, the brain determines your limits. There's a guy named Tim Noakes at the University of Cape Town who first advanced this idea really in a very literal way. It's not that your muscles don't matter, it's that muscle fatigue only matters in that it provides information to your brain which then decides to what your limits are. So as I got into that area of research, I got really enthusiastic about the brain-centered research. But the deeper you go into any research, the less simple the story gets. A marathon. What finding on how the brain governs physical limits jumped out to you as especially meaningful? Alex Hutchinson. One of the lightbulb moments for me was a study by a guy named Samuel Marcoura, a researcher at the University of Kent, where they used subliminal images, flashing images of faces on a screen for 16 milliseconds at a time, which is a tenth of the time of a blink, so people were totally unaware of these images. Athletes were exposed to these images during a cycling test. If there was a smiling face compared to a frowning face, they improved their performance. They were about 12% better with the smiling faces than with the frowning faces. It's very, very hard to separate out the power of suggestion and the power of placebo in all these brain-centered studies. A study like that really confirmed to me that there's something deeper here. It's not just a question of a giant placebo effect. Fundamentally, your brain is interpreting signals and making decisions on what your physical limits are. Ultramarathon. There's the old proverb that if you want to go fast, go alone, if you want to go far, go together. What do we know about how other people influence our endurance? Alex Hutchinson. Emma Cohen, an evolutionary anthropologist at the University of Oxford, did a study where the university rowing team did a pain tolerance test before and after doing a stationary rowing machine workout. What she found is if they did the workout alone in a room with a rowing machine, they would get 1 increase in pain tolerance. If they did the workout with their teammates, still on stationary rowing machines, but sitting next to each other with these teammates with whom they have been pursuing a common goal for a year or more, they got a much bigger pain tolerance from exactly the same workout. There's something powerful in our brains that responds to the prospect of being on a team, whether that's an Olympic team representing a country or whether it's your local group of buddies with whom you play soccer or run. Marathon. One of the findings that startled me was Guillaume Millet at the University of Calgary's works showing the level of muscle fatigue was actually lower in runners in a 200-mile race than it was in runners in a 100-mile race. How do you square that with what we know about the brain and endurance? Alex Hutchinson. "4 days out, after 100 miles or 200 miles, it doesn't really matter how much you can deadlift fresh because muscular strength is only relevant insofar as you're able and willing to push yourself to use it. Once you're getting up to these very long durations, it's all about whether your brain can keep you going and less about whether your legs are capable of going. If you stop someone 150 miles in one of those races and hook them up to an electric shock machine, their muscles have plenty of juice in them. It's their brain that's unable to keep them going forward as quickly as they might like." A marathon. What does this mean for how we train, as amateurs and professionals? Alex Hutchinson. All physical training is also mental training, and athletes tend to have greater pain tolerance and things like that. But there's no evidence that they're born that way. It's the act of committing to a regular training program over a long period of time. That exposure to discomfort, learning to get comfortable being uncomfortable, teaches you to handle these sorts of uncomfortable situations. Let's say you're starting an exercise training program, you're going to run a 5K in 6 months, and you go and run 3 times a week. In 6 months, your body is definitely going to be fitter, but you're also going to be able to push yourself to a harder place. You're going to learn that when you're out of breath, when your legs are hurting, that doesn't mean you have to stop, it doesn't mean you're out of oxygen. That's a yellow light rather than a red light, and you can ignore the yellow light for a while. There are ways of specifically training your brain. I wouldn't say that's the first priority for someone that isn't looking for the last 0.1% of performance, but there are some things people don't think about,